Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the MoonLightin Outdoors podcast. If you hadn't already, please go on over and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as our Instagram and Facebook. Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We have an incredible show here for the MLO show tonight. We're going to be interviewing an absolute legend in the hunting industry, Marion Ray James. This young man is the founder of the Bowhunting magazine, the Bowhunter magazine. He's been in the hunting industry for a very long time. He founded it in August of 1971 is when the Bowhunter magazine actually came out, the very first edition. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and call him up, get him on the line, and we're just going to get right into this. I could go on, but he tells the story better than I do.
Hello.
Hey, Marion, it's Justin Ham calling. How are you?
Yeah, Justin. How's it going with you?
Going great. Really appreciate you staying up for us. I know you have a big day planned for tomorrow.
Every day is a big day.
Every day. So, listen, we are actually recording. We're not going live today, but we are going to record this just so we can go back and clean things up when I make a mistake. I'm sure you're going to do fine. So,
we'll see about that.
So I did. I got into a little bit of your introduction before I called you up. I just said that we were going to be calling Marion Ray James, and you go by MR. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, so a lot of the older folks in the industry, they're going to know is just MR, right?
Yeah, that's what my byline's been for over 50 years now, and the things I've written for bow hunting and the sport. Yes.
Awesome. So I don't know how long we're going to end up taking tonight, and a lot of it depends on how much time you have, I guess. I'm sure you're a busy man. You got hunting season's well underway, and you're pumped up to go to Illinois in the morning. Is that right?
Well, I'm going tomorrow afternoon, and at my age, I usually am in bed by this time every night. I just can't take it anymore. But I'm just yanking your chain a little bit here. I'm usually up till close to midnight every night, and getting up early is just natural at my age, so no problem at all.
What time is early?
Early? When I get up?
Yeah, what time is that?
Oh, it's a lot of times between 4 and 5.
That's early. So just for everyone back home, Marion he'll be 80 years old in December. Is that right?
That's what they tell me. Yes,
okay.
And I've got a quick, I guess, story that relates to archery and bow hunting. I was born December 6th, 1940, and that is exactly 10 years to the day that the first licensed bow hunter in the United States, a man named Roy Case from Wisconsin, killed the first legal deer during a hunting season in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. How about that?
That is something. So am I wrong in thinking that December 6th is D-Day?
It's December 7th, 1941 was when the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor.
And there was something there. I just couldn't figure out what it was. But
Yeah, that's close, but that's the only association. I think June 6th is D-Day.
Okay, June 6th. I think you were right. So December 6th, 1940. So in December 6th, 2020, you're going to be 80 years old. So you've had a long time to enjoy this hunting industry. You have started the bow hunter. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I've been truly blessed to. It's not everybody that can get up in the morning and pack a lunch and kiss the wife goodbye and pick up your bow and go to work. But that's what I do.
That's living the dream. You're living a lot of people's dream, actually.
Yeah,
so,
like you say, the good Lord bless me, and I don't know why, but I'm not complaining at all.
That's awesome. So at what age did you take your first deer?
I was 22. I started hunting deer. There weren't many deer in southern Illinois where I grew up. I was 16 before I even saw a deer in my home county. Here in Indiana, my wife and I moved to Indiana after we got married in 1960. And I started bow hunting in Indiana. I think the license was $5 back then for an archery license. And the season ran until from October until the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, and that was pretty much, I think, statewide, if I remember right. But I started hunting the first year in '61. I didn't see a deer all season. In '62, I saw one doe that I kicked out of a bed, headed back to the truck after my hunt, and that was it. And then '63, my luck changed, and I think I saw a total of 7 or 8 deer, and I lucked out and killed a real nice buck on the last day of the season in '63.
That's great. So where's that buck now? Still hanging on the wall?
He's on the wall in my home office. He was only, he was only a 6-pointer, but he had incredible mass. I think he was probably at least 6.5 or more years old. The bases of his antlers were over 6.5 inches on one side and just under 7 on the other. And at that time, in the first record book, Pope and Young record book that came out in '75, he was larger at the bases of his antler than any deer in the record book, and that includes Mel Johnson's world record. So you can get some idea of he had a little going for him. He didn't have many points, but he still had some stuff that made you smile.
I'm smiling, and it's not even my buck. So first deer was a record deer. Do you think that changed your career at all? Do you think that's what really made you take off in the industry?
Well, I wrote a story about it for Archery Magazine, and that was, I guess, the beginning. In '65, 2 years later, I killed my first mule deer in Colorado. I couldn't get anyone to go hunting with me, so I got in the car, drove out there, drove nonstop from Indiana to Rifle, Colorado, got a license across the counter. Licenses in those days in Colorado were $10, non-resident license. On the first day, I killed a 3-3 muley with, he was probably about 40 yards away, but I shot a lot of tournaments in those days, and the 40-yard shot wasn't all that much. I was shooting a Ben Pearson bow that pulled, I think, 46 pounds, if I remember right, something like that, and I was using Bear Razorhead arrows, and shot him through the heart, and he didn't go very far. I got him dressed, took him to a locker, had him cut up, put in the cooler, drove all the way back. It was about 1,200 miles one way back home, and that was one of the shortest hunts, but one of the most enjoyable hunts I ever made. Just hated the drive.
I was going to say, you said that you couldn't find anybody to go with you, huh?
That year, from then on, every year, I went to the same camp, and usually would take, there were a bunch of guys at the bow club, the Tysepi Bowhunters in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We'd go out as a group, and we had a ball. We took a lot of deer, brought a lot of deer home, and even filled up part of the U-Haul with some Coors beer, which back in those days wasn't sold anywhere except Colorado. So we'd hunt and celebrate both. Not while we were driving, of course, but coming home afterwards, we'd celebrate a little bit. Good memories.
That's awesome. So where are the guys that you were at deer camp with? Are they still around?
Well, my partner, Don Clark, he's deceased now. He was one of my original Bowhunter magazine partners. Bob Schisler is retired now. He lives up in northeastern Indiana. And Steve Doucette was my graphic artist, and he is retired now, and I think he lives in Missouri at this time. So we've lost one of the original founders. Fred Wallace from Ohio later joined the group, and we made him a junior partner. And he's retired on a farm in Kentucky now. So we're all in that age group where we don't know if those buzzards circling the house are for us or for something dead in the field. We just wonder about that.
It's awesome that you got such a good sense of humor about it. So I'm just trying to think here. I mean, there's so many different directions that I could go with this interview tonight because, I mean, Marion Ray James, this is a guy that you've traveled all across North America. You probably hunted Canada too.
Yep.
You met a lot of people in your time, Fred Bear included. Talk about Fred Bear for a minute, if you would.
Fred was an idol to a lot of us, and I met him for the first time at a Pope and Young Club convention in Denver, Colorado. I had killed a record book black bear the year before, and Fred was on the board of directors of the Pope and Young Club. I met him. The president at that time, Glenn St. Charles, who founded the club, had just stepped down, and Dr. Larry Bamford, who was a college professor and a heck of a bow hunter, was the president. And I had hired Larry to be the hunting editor of Bowhunter magazine, which came out in 1971 for the first time. And so I got to meet the board of directors through Larry, got to spend some time with Fred. Fred was a funny guy. I mean, he really was. He was self-deprecating. He was humble, and he was just a real class act for someone with his reputation. He is probably, in the history of bow hunting, one of a very small handful of individuals who made the sport what it is today. When he founded Bear Archery Company back in the mid-30s and went on to hunt big game and publicize it on TV and in movies, he did so much to attract people to the sport that the sport's just got to be forever indebted to Fred Bear, Papa Bear, as we called him.
Papa Bear. So tell me this: in that bow hunting industry, you know, you were talking about Fred Bear being an idol. I assume he was one of your idols, then, correct?
Oh yeah, sure.
So, was there anyone else that you kind of idolized, looked up to?
Oh yeah, there were people like, and you might recognize some of these names, Ben Pearson, who founded a company in Arkansas and ended up, this was in the 1930s, and by the 1950s and 60s when I got involved, his was one of the, along with Bear Archery, was one of the leading bow manufacturing companies in the world. I mean, when he had his 50th anniversary, I forget how many millions and millions of bows and arrows he had sold all over the world.
Wow. And
he also was a hunter. There's a couple of bears that he took, a polar bear, I think a brown bear that still rank high in the records and are on display at the Archery Hall of Fame Museum. Fred was one of the first inductees, along with Ben Pearson. Those were two names that really stood out. And Doug Easton is another name that you may or may not recognize if you shoot Easton arrows. He founded a bow company in California and ended up moving to Utah and establishing, I guess, a long history of quality arrows being manufactured and sold. A lot of people who shoot composite arrows these days may have started out like I did with wood and then aluminum. But the first Easton arrow, aluminum arrow, was marketed and sold in 1939. And you think about that, when a lot of people in those days were using nothing but cedar shafts. that shows you the impact that Doug and his invention had on the sport of bow hunting.
That's incredible. I didn't realize that aluminum arrow shafts would have went back to 1939.
Well, they do, and the thing about that was, again, his innovation set the standard for the arrow making industry. And Jim, his son, after Doug died, Jim took over, and getting to know these people was just a benefit for me to meet and spend time with these guys. And these are when you look at the people who got things rolling and what they accomplished, paved the way for everyone who picks up a bow now and goes deer hunting. It's just, there's no doubt about that. You probably know the name Allen, Hollis Wilbur Allen is the man who patented the first compound bow in the mid-60s, 67, I think it was. And Tom Jennings of Jennings Archery, he got a patent from Allen. Allen was a Missouri deer hunter who invented the compound bow and started that revolution. Jennings got the rights to publish, or to produce rather, the compound bow in California, and the quality of the Jennings bow really outshone the Allen bows, which were kind of primitive to start with. And Allen was killed in a car wreck in Missouri before the compound craze really happened. So Tom Jennings, who was a good friend, and I never met Allen, but did know him through the business. He is again the godfather, so to speak, of the compound bow. But Tom is the one who really took it to where it is today. Started in the right direction, anyway.
That's incredible. No, I couldn't imagine being able to be associated with the hunting industry at your level. What you were doing back in the, I guess, the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, all the way up until you retired in 2006. You probably met people and traveled places that most people would only dream of. So that's
well, it was said it, Justin. It was just like a dream come true. To right before Fred passed away, Papa Bear, in 86 or 88, it was. Before he had called me probably a couple months before he died, and he was ailing. He was the guest of honor at the Pope and Young Convention in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 87, and that was the last time I got to spend any time with him. But he was ailing at the time, short of breath. When he walked around, he pulled one of those oxygen carts behind him.
Sure. And
just to give you an idea of his sense of humor, he'd explain to people, a lot of people think there's oxygen in these tanks, but really it's peppermint schnapps. And that was just Fred, and he made fun, and he loved the ladies. He'd come up to them and he'd put his arm around their shoulder and he'd say, "You want to have your picture taken with me?" And I tell stories. He was a tremendous storyteller and could just go on. He'd captivate people, and you could sit there and listen to him for hours. But he was really a gentleman and a heck of a bow hunter who set the standard again for quality archery products. He and Ben Pearson, and then later some of the other bow companies that really took off. But getting to know these guys was just a perk of being in the business like I was.
That's awesome. That's incredible. So following your story, Marion, because this is about you, not just about your Papa Bear, but you have lived an awesome life, and your wife's name's Janice. Is that correct?
That's right.
And so Janice has been putting up with you leaving for probably weeks at a time every once in a while. So I'm going to throw a shout out to Janice and say that she's an MVP there for sure. I know my wife.
Well, I think so.
My wife gets upset when I'm gone for a couple hours, but she still loves me and appreciates me. and she.
Well, I should say that maybe Janet just glad to have me out of her hair for a while, but no, she's been part of the magazine business, and I couldn't have gotten where I am now without her involvement.
That's awesome. So, you started your and talk about the Blue Jay business. So, is that was the name of your? Go ahead.
Yeah, when we incorporated in 1970, we incorporated as Blue Jay Inc. Publishers, and blue is my favorite color, and Jay for the James. I was the majority stockholder. Don Clark, Bob Schisler, Steve Doucette were my original partners, and then, as I say, we added Fred Wallace from Ohio as a junior partner, and we kept that business and grew that business from nothing to what it was when we sold it in 1988. And each one of us had specific roles, but we were a team that worked together and worked together well, and that's what made Bowhunter the success that it became.
Sure. So when you started Blue Jay, did you know that you were going to be going into the bow hunting magazine, or did?
Yeah, that was. We also published some hunting books. We had Roger Rothar, who was a deer hunter, lived in Ohio, had a tremendous following. He wrote a series of articles for Bowhunter right after the magazine started, and that evolved into a book called In Pursuit of Trophy Whitetails, and I don't know how many thousands of copies that book sold, and Blue Jay published that book for him. Dr. Dave Samuel, who was our conservation editor to start with, wrote books for us. John Maggie McGee, who was our comedy relief, so to speak, he was our humor columnist. He wrote 2 books for us, and Blue Jay published those books. And it was just a way of giving our readers additional material from the folks at Bowhunter magazine.
Sure. So, we talked about the history, the history of the history of Bowhunting magazine. We talked about Fred Bear and some of his journeys and different things. And I did appreciate you talking about your most memorable hunt there. That's pretty neat. I wouldn't have thought that it would have been a mule deer, or you said caribou, right?
Yeah. When people ask me what my most memorable hunt was, I have to tell them that I forget what year it was, probably in the 80s, I took my son Dave, who is also a bow hunter, he and his wife up to the Northwest Territories. Janet went along. We went up a few days before archery season opened for caribou. We fished the lake. The women outfished Dave and I consistently. We had a ball. It was Janet just said it was in the 90s, which she corrects everything that needs corrected when I mess up. But anyway, we went up there, and Dave had never been on a caribou hunt. And Dave is I had 3 sons. The oldest one passed away of cancer a few years ago. But Dave was the only other bow hunter in the family besides me, and he's got a teenage son now who is a bow hunter. So the James legacy for bow hunting is going to continue beyond me and Dave now. But I took them up. Dave wanted to try caribou hunting. I'd been up there several times. It was a great camp, a fly-in camp. We fly into Yellowknife, stay overnight in a hotel, and take a bush plane out and land on a lake and hunt caribou. And on this hunt, Dave and I and Norma, that's Dave's wife, and Janet, on the second day of the hunt, if I remember right, we were having a lunch up in the rocks on a wind-blown hillside, and there were caribou moving down in the valley below us we could see. Make a long story short, one of the bulls came up through the rocks. I made a stalk, and I shot him, and he dropped right there. So my guide and I cleaned him field dressed him, quartered him, and started packing. We were about 5 miles from the boat. So we started out across the tundra, carrying all the meat and the hide and the horns and that sort of thing. While I was gone, Dave saw a caribou, stalked it, and killed it. And we returned later in the day, just about the time that Dave was getting ready. They were getting ready to field dress that animal. Why I'm going on about this is what happened next is what made this so memorable. Dave's guide, who was field dressing the animal, when he got down to some of the cartilage in the leg, knee joint of the caribou, he had a razor sharp skinning knife. The knife slipped and he actually stabbed himself in the groin and cut the femoral artery. And those of you who know anatomy know that the femoral artery is what feeds the blood to the lower extremities in both legs. And without shutting that down in a hurry, you're going to die. I'd killed a real nice bull elk in New Mexico the year before, and I hit him in the femoral artery. And he only went about 100 yards, and that's a 800-pound bull elk.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was, and we were probably 8 miles from camp. We were 120 miles from Yellowknife by air. And here Leon has stabbed himself and is bleeding to death in front of us. Make a very long story short, we got a tourniquet. I put a tourniquet around his leg. There was room to shut it down. We got on the radios to camp, tell what happened. This is when the good Lord blessed us. There was a diamond mining camp north of us, about 90 miles, and they heard our SOS calls going out. And they said, we've got a helicopter here at the base camp. We'll fly down and can get him back to the main camp if there's a plane that can take him on to Yellowknife. And it just so happened that a float plane had dropped off supplies at camp. They'd already left, but they heard our call and turned around and came back. So we got it shut down, got the bleeding stopped. The helicopter ended up landing about 40 yards from us on the tundra. Dave's wife and I climbed in with Leon, flew back to camp. The float plane was waiting. They put him on the plane, flew him to Yellowknife. He passed out finally from lack of blood loss. Just as they landed, they rushed him to the emergency room at a local hospital, and they saved his life.
That's incredible.
So when people want to know what's my most memorable hunt, that's it, hands down. And the year after that happened, I got a package from the Northwest Territories, and it was from Leon, and he'd sent me his master guide badge and just a note in there. He said, "Thanks again." And that's one of the things I have in my display case from now 60 years of bow hunting across North America. And that's all awful special to me personally.
That would be. And you know, when I was asking you what your most memorable hunt was, I never expected it to go that angle, but that's an incredible story. So,
just again, the good Lord was looking after us that day.
Yeah. So, you know, that kind of leads me into the next topic that I'd like to switch to, and that's safety, because anything can happen out there, right?
And it does, yes.
And I know that you and I had a phone conversation before, and we were talking about just tell the story about the guy that was walking in with his tree stand on his back. Tell that story if you would.
Yeah, this is in the Fort Wayne area when the magazine was getting going well. This was, I think, in the early 80s. There was a hunter who walked into a woods where he had permission to hunt. And there was another hunter who was a relative of the landowner who had taken up a position along the wood's edge. They both scouted, both seen deer, and so they set up. It was still dark, In fact, it was an hour before legal shooting hours. And the guy that was in the ground blind that he had set up heard something walking. And it was the other hunter with this tree stand on his back. And there were two metal bars that were the base of the stand that stuck up probably a foot and a half above the stand itself, which was on his back. And in telling the story later, the guy saw what he thought was a deer, the shadow of a deer, moving in front of him. And he drew his bow, and the other hunter stopped and turned toward him because he heard the movement. And the man at full draw released and shot the other hunter through the heart, buried the broadhead in his spine, and killed him instantly. And that trial went on in Columbia City. I attended it on behalf of Bowhunter Magazine and wrote a feature about this story. We also raised, I don't know how many thousands of dollars for the family. The guy that was killed was married and had, I think, 3, maybe 4 kids, 3, I believe. Anyway, we did what we could to help, and I attended the trial. And it was just one of those unfortunate tragedies that changed one family's life forever, and probably pretty much devastated the hunter who made the serious error in judgment and killed someone. And these things happen, and that's why when I talk safety for bow hunters, the woods are full of people who don't know what the hell they're doing. And they're so anxious sometimes that they lose all common sense in their aspiration to kill a deer. And I never walk in the woods, even though I don't think a thing about walking in pitch dark, familiar hunting land. That doesn't bother me. But I don't know who else may be there illegally, or if it's public land,
right,
legally.
Right.
And it only takes one mistake. So I always carry a small flashlight pointed at the ground and just walk to see where I'm stepping. I figure even the most idiotic hunter on earth knows that deer don't walk around with flashlights.
Right.
So I carry one going to and out of the woods in the dark, even on my own property. There was a friend of mine who's a member of the Indiana Bow Hunters who was walking to a tree stand in the dark. This is down in central Indiana, somewhere around Brown County. And a fella in a tree stand heard something walking in the leaves, and he actually shot and missed this shadow once. And then the second arrow hit the other hunter just by the belly button, gut shot him. And he did survive, but that sort of tragedy sticks with anyone for life, both if you're on the receiving or the giving end of it. You're just not the same after that.
Absolutely.
So my point is always to be safety conscious, and you never know who's out there. I can cite cases of people splitting up to stalk a deer. One hunter overshoots the deer, strikes the other hunter, and kills him.
Right.
I've got a whole file full of tragic accidents like that. So you have to be safety conscious 100% of the time. And here's a shocking statistic that a lot of people don't realize. The number one cause of death in hunters is not shooting, but it's falls from tree stands. And this is a tragedy waiting to happen if you do not wear a safety harness and a climbing device getting in and out of your stand. You can and will fall. If you don't believe it, I can introduce you to the relatives of people who've lost someone falling from stands, and I can also introduce you to quadriplegics and paraplegics whose lives are shattered because they fell, and you fall every year. I've already heard of 2 deaths so far this young season in the United States, and it can happen. And anyone who risks climbing into an elevated stand without a safety harness and a climbing rope is asking for trouble.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that we had this talk because, the last interview that I did was with a guy by the name of Mark Byrne, who is, he's actually an Indiana record book keeper, and he's got a broken back from a tree stand fall. So, I can't say that it hits home for me because I've never had an accident, but I hope that I know that myself and hopefully a few of the people that are going to be watching this podcast will all will remember this conversation and think about safety a little bit more.
And if not do it for yourself, do it for the family.
You're right.
I mean, you imagine your family, if you're paralyzed and can't work and are a burden on everyone you're associated with, it's a needless tragedy. And if you don't think it can happen to you, you're dead wrong, or you may be dead wrong.
Right. So, moving out of safety, and I appreciate all of that. I mean, and I hope that everyone back home listening to this, they definitely take that in consideration because it goes further than just from a tree stand fall. It could be, a senseless shot in the dark. They have regulations on shooting hours for a reason. So, I remember a Facebook post that you made, and I feel like it was several years back. And as we were talking earlier, it came into my mind. And it was, and I can't even really remember the direction that it went, but I was very intrigued by it. It was about broadheads. You made a Facebook post about broadheads. Is this coming to you? I hope that it does.
Well, over the years, I've made hundreds of posts about broadheads. Was it history?
It was about the history of broadheads.
Okay, yeah.
And
I'm not looking for publicity or anything, but in this book that I've just written and published, I go into the history of broadheads, right. And it started, of course, with the Indians and knapping flint and other mineral materials to make razor sharp points for killing game and killing enemies. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, they started making broadheads, very crude broadheads. Pope and Young, Dr. Saxon Pope and Art Young, made their own bows, they made their own hunting arrows, and they made their own broadheads. And Ishi, who was the last of the Yahi Indians that Dr. Pope studied and befriended and learned bow hunting from, showed them how to knap razor-sharp broadheads. But the metal broadheads took off, as I say, in the late 1800s and into the 1900s. Right. And today, you've got no shortage of various kinds of broadheads, all designed for one thing, to create massive blood loss and to create reasonably instantaneous death, because bleeding to death is what kills animals. And this is something that using dull heads or using ineffective heads, it's a problem. There are a lot of quality heads, and there's so many. It's like cars. I mean, what's your favorite car? What's mine? What's the neighbor's? They all get the job done or can, but you need to not skimp on buying quality heads. I remember the days when you could buy a dozen razor heads for under $10. I was in an archery shop the other day, and I looked, and some individual heads cost $45. One head.
Wow.
And this is just this sign of the times, I guess. But broadheads are next to the bow the most important thing. Broadhead, the arrow, and the bow are what make bow hunting, and you don't want to skimp, particularly on what delivers the fatal wound, for sure.
Sure. So I assume that you're more of a fixed broadhead guy. Is that right?
Yeah, and I use a number of heads and have experimented for probably most of my bow hunting career with different heads. I've killed a lot with razor heads, but I like sharpening. I like to sharpen a broadhead. I use a file. I use an oil stone, and I use a leather strop. And I like to see the hair on my arm disappear when I'm shaving with something that I'm going to shoot into an animal. If you can't sharpen broadheads, by all means, use injector blade heads. Use heads that come pre-sharpened, but don't shoot them into a target and then go hunting with them.
Sure.
You should shoot broadheads to practice, to make sure that they you know how they fly. They can fly different from field points, but at the same time, the head that you shoot should be extremely razor sharp, and you don't want anything less, whatever brand you decide to use.
Sure. Just out of curiosity, what bow do you use today?
I shoot, if you're talking a compound, I shoot Matthews. I shoot a couple of others too, but Matthews sponsored Bowhunter Magazine's television show, and I used their bow at their request. It would be bad to show up with a fair archery bow or a Jennings bow. And back in the day when I first started, Jennings was my favorite because between it and the Allen, there was no comparison in my mind. But I shoot Matthews compounds. I shoot several different kinds. My all-time favorite stick bow is a Black Widow recurve. It's on display in the Archery Hall of Fame in Springfield, Missouri, along with a Ben Pearson bow that I used early on to take my first mountain lion and a number of deer. That Black Widow accounted for my first record book black bear. I'm shooting a recurve bow made by a Boyer, Neil Jacobson, in Kalispell, Montana. It's a bear's paw bow, and it was custom made for my late friend, Dr. Chuck Williams. And after he passed away, his family gave it to me and asked if I would shoot some animals with it in Chuck's memory, and that's what I'm doing now. It's a personal thing, and it's a beautiful bow, and I just enjoy hunting with it. I've never shot a longbow all that much because I can't shoot it as well as I can a recurve, and so I don't even bother trying. I have hunted with longbows and had some success, but I stick with recurves and or compounds, and right now I'm going back pretty much to the recurve bow.
So since we're hot and heavy in the bow category right now, can we talk about what you and I were talking about earlier with the introduction of the crossbow into the archery industry?
Sure.
Tell me about your feelings with that.
I've gone on record that I think crossbows are incredible. The modern crossbow are incredible weapons. They are amazing. For this book that I wrote, I had a sales rep stop by the farm here and give me a complete introduction, and I was amazed at the quality, the accuracy of a modern crossbow. He happened to display the Raven line, and there are a number of equally quality lines of crossbows available. And I'm not promoting Raven. I'm not promoting any crossbow because I will, and this is a personal choice. I think they're great, but I will not hunt with them because of the challenge involved. When people ask me why I bow hunt, it's because of the challenge. I could take that crossbow and with my friend's help, the sales rep, I could hit the bullseye at distances that I wouldn't even try shooting. And I'm talking, in some cases, I didn't shoot that far, but I watched him, and he was hitting the bullseye at over 100 yards, time after time after time. And to me, the whole idea of bow hunting and why I took it up and why I quit gun hunting was it got too easy with a gun. So I hunted with a bow for challenge and sport. And I don't shoot much beyond. Most deer in the United States are killed between 30 and 40 yards, 50 being the extreme. But people I know are quite capable of killing deer at 80, 90, 100 yards. And my friend Don Clark, my partner, I saw him, or didn't see him, but I was in a camp. He killed a mule deer buck at 90 yards.
Wow.
But we shot, in those days, we shot tournaments, and we were used to shooting long distances at targets. I like the challenge of getting close, remaining undetected, and delivering a shot without the animal knowing you're that close. That's what bow hunting means to me, and that's why I won't use a crossbow to hunt. If you want to use one, fine. I don't have any argument with it, but it is different. The thing that concerns me more than anything else is the impact that it's having on deer herds already. In Wisconsin, for example, which is known as one of the top whitetail hunting states in the country, in 3 short years after the crossbow was legalized in that state, the number of animals killed by crossbow hunters exceeded that of rifle hunters and bow hunters using conventional bows. It's easier to kill at longer distances with a crossbow than it is conventional bows, and it's more in that book that I keep talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Just finished. I quoted a number of statistics. Arkansas, Ohio, back in the 80s, when they introduced crossbows, within 10 years, there were more people using crossbows than conventional bows in those states. It's just man's, I guess, desire to fill tags. I'm not interested. I've killed enough animals over the years. If I never kill another one, that's fine.
Right.
But when I do kill one, I want him under my conditions, short distance, and a well-placed shot, not sitting back 100 yards and lobbing either a crossbow bolt or arrow at him and taking that as something of an accomplishment. It is. I admire the accuracy, but it's just not bow hunting to me, and that's the best I can explain it.
So bow hunting to you is up close and personal.
Yeah, remaining undetected.
Yeah.
Here you've got a wild animal whose survival depends on his alert senses of smell, of hearing, of seeing movement, and just shooting a deer. That's why I hunt so much on the ground these days. I've killed, I don't know how many animals from tree stands, and there's nothing wrong with that. Right. And I want to make that clear. I'm not disparaging tree stand hunting, sitting and waiting, but I like to be proactive, and I like to get close enough and not be detected and getting off a shot and killing an animal than I do just waiting for him to walk under my tree and shoot him and dropping him in his tracks, or putting an arrow through the boiler room and then blood trailing him to where he piled up. Mm-hmm. It's a personal choice, and all hunting should be a personal choice.
Sure.
But there's a chapter in that book called What Happened to Hunting the Hard Way. In 1953, I think it was, Howard Hill wrote a book called Hunting the Hard Way about why bow hunting to him was important. This is in 53, if you think about that. And he was saying that the development of the modern hunting rifle with telescopic sights has changed hunting forever, because time was hunting was not a threat to the game populations. It's already, I say, it's crossbows, for example, are hurting deer hunting in some states because they're taking more animals than what the Fish and Game people thought they would.
Sure.
And so that's a shortage that's created by the use of a crossbow. And gun hunting can be devastating. Talk about when there's an EHD outbreak somewhere and the herd's already hurting. And if they allow you to take 5 deer legally, do you take 5 deer when the herd's already being decimated by disease? Some of these things just don't make any sense, and this is why it's up to individual hunters to decide what's right for them, and that's what I always try to do.
Right. Now, the politics of the whitetail industry, they can get into an uproar pretty quick. I have a lot of friends in the whitetail business. They're pretty involved in deer management and such, but it's funny to see and read some of the posts that you'll see on social media about, one guy will say, well, I've got to have that meat in the freezer. And so he's going to whack out 5 or 6 deer, in the season.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I think that, I personally am just going to kill one buck a year if I can. Killing does is something I've not done for a long time. I've got kids that I like to take hunting and such too, but as far as what can I do personally to help the deer herd, I'm going to take 1 buck because I'm going to kind of counteract that guy that's taking 5 or 6 does out of the herd. That's just me.
Yeah, and that's an individual choice again, and that's what I'm getting at. Mm-hmm. If people choose to do it, if they've got a cause, I'd begrudge no one taking meat if they need meat. But to have someone go online and say, I just killed my 25th deer this year and hunted 8 states, and I don't know that fella needs the meat. Mm-hmm. There was a time, and I think hunters go through these phases. I know I liked to be able to say I killed 15 or 20 deer a year. But I like to think, too, that maybe after a time you realize that it's more than just a numbers game. It's the quality. The quantity doesn't matter as much as how the animal's taken. And to just shoot something because you can, because you've got an extra tag, that's your choice. If you do, fine. I'm not going to say a word. But then to complain after years of over-harvest, well, I'm not seeing nearly as many deer as I used to. Well, there's a reason for that, and some people just don't make the connection, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, Marion, we've been talking for 52 minutes. Is there anything that I need to ask you that I hadn't? What can you pass on to the young hunter today? I mean, is there any information that you want to throw our way?
My advice, and I was involved when Bill Wadsworth started the National Bowhunter Education programs back in the late 70s and 80s. Bill realized that hunters getting started need assistance and help.
Right.
And I encourage kids to work through whether it's bowhunter education or some archery club that helps kids get started. 4-H at one time had an archery program. But don't be afraid to get help and get advice. And I still think that the bowhunter education programs can benefit anyone. And some guys I know will say, I've hunted deer all my life. I don't need to know that stuff. You may be surprised at what you learn. I thought I knew a lot when I became a certified instructor in Indiana back in, I think it was 81, if I remember correctly, and teaching classes and helping people get started on the right foot and understand what hunting responsibly and safely is all about is very important. And that's something that every youngster and every beginning hunter needs to entertain the idea of getting that information before venturing out and learning by trial and error.
That's great. That's great. So, just kind of in closing, I know we've covered a lot today as far as our conversation's been. It started all the way back in, I think the earliest date we talked was 1940, and here we are in 2020. So we've definitely, well, I think, no, we were talking about 1939. What happened in 39? The aluminum arrow, right?
Yeah, and we even talked about the Civil War era with the Thompson brothers and their book that started people fascinated. And Saxon Pope's 1923 book, Hunting with the Bow and Arrow, it inspired Fred Bear and Ben Pearson and Doug Easton and these hunters. There's this, it goes back a long way. And like I said, I'm humbled and I'm proud to be able to have experienced what I've been able to do in helping people understand what bow hunting is all about, and to become safe and responsible bow hunters. That's plenty of satisfaction for me.
And I appreciate it so much that you're sharing
your
story with us.
It's a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm sorry for rambling on as much as I do, but when you get to be my age, you really say, what the heck. So,
one last thing that I do have for you.
Yeah.
So if someone that would listen to this, if they do want to look into purchasing one of your books, where could they go to find that?
You can go to my website. It is www.mrjames.com. And that website gives a complete history of who I am, what I've written, a lot about bow hunting in general, and there's also an ad for this latest book, which just came out last month and is really I'm gratified to see the initial response, because we're busy filling orders every day, and I don't want to sound like I'm trying to sell books, but if you are interested in who I am and what I've done over the years, you can go to that website, and if you want to buy a book, that's fine, and God bless you.
We appreciate having you on. Hey, Marion, good luck on your Illinois hunt tomorrow afternoon.
Thanks, Justin.
I'll be following you on Facebook, and hopefully I'll get to see a nice buck there with your picture on it.
Well, regardless, I'm going to be grinning when you see me in the picture. So
that's awesome.
God bless you, and you take care. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Marion. Take care, buddy. See ya. Bye. Guys, that was Marion James, and I'm kind of humbled just having the opportunity to talk to him. It was hard for me to cut in during the interview just because I was so appreciative of just him giving his time to us. I may not ever have the opportunity to talk to anyone like him again. So I don't have a whole lot to say right now. Marion, if you're set through your own interview, I appreciate you so much. You don't even know. I definitely will be getting on that www.mrjames.com, and I'm going to be getting a copy of that book myself, because he had a lot of good stories, and I couldn't imagine being able to sit down and read a little bit more into his life and his adventures that he's been on. And how about that most memorable hunt of his? That definitely wasn't what I was expecting to hear, but this guy's seen a lot, and good. He's brought so much good to the industry. He's been able to share his stories through the Bowhunter magazine from 1971 all the way up until his retirement in 2006. I don't know, guys. Like I said, it's a humbling event for me. So thank you for tuning in. MoonLightin Outdoors MLO show. We love you. Thank you very much. See you later.